Have you ever sent a text message and watched those three dots appear, only to have them disappear forever? You know exactly what I'm talking about. That sinking feeling when you see that little notification showing your message was delivered, then read, but no response comes back. Hours pass, then days, and suddenly you're analyzing every word you wrote, wondering if you said something wrong, checking your phone obsessively, and feeling like your brain is about to explode from the uncertainty. If this sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. In fact, what you're experiencing has a name in psychology circles, and it's doing some pretty wild things to your brain that you probably never realized. Today, we're going to dive deep into the fascinating and sometimes disturbing world of what happens inside your head when someone leaves you on red. But before we get started, I want you to think about the last time this happened to you. Really think about it. How did it make you feel? What thoughts went through your mind? Keep that experience in mind as we explore the science behind why being left on red can feel almost physically painful, and why your brain treats it like a genuine threat to your survival. Let's start with a story that might sound eerily familiar. Sarah, a 28-year-old marketing professional, met someone interesting at a coffee shop. They exchanged numbers, had a great text conversation that evening, and she went to bed feeling excited about this new connection. The next morning, she sent a thoughtful good morning text. She saw it was delivered, then read, but no response came. At first, she brushed it off. People are busy, right? But as hours turned into a full day, then 2 days, then a week, something strange started happening in Sarah's brain. She couldn't focus at work. She kept checking her phone every few minutes. She analyzed and reanalyzed that last message she sent, wondering if she had somehow ruined everything. She felt anxious, rejected, and confused all at once. What Sarah didn't realize is that her brain was essentially treating this situation like a survival threat. And this isn't an exaggeration or metaphor. The same neural pathways that activate when we're in physical danger were firing off in response to being ignored digitally. To understand why this happens, we need to go back to the very basics of human psychology and evolution. Humans are fundamentally social creatures. For thousands of years, being accepted by our tribe wasn't just nice to have. It was literally a matter of life and death. If you were rejected or ignored by your social group, you could end up alone in a dangerous world with no protection, no resources, and no chance of survival. Your brain hasn't caught up to the fact that we live in a modern world where being ignored in a text message doesn't actually threaten your survival. As far as your ancient brain is concerned, social rejection still equals potential death. So when someone leaves you on red, especially someone you care about or are interested in, your brain interprets this as a threat and responds accordingly. This response starts in your amygdala, the brain's alarm system. The amygdala is constantly scanning your environment for threats, and when it detects something that could be dangerous, it triggers what we call the fight or flight response. Your heart rate increases, stress hormones like cortisol flood your system, and your attention becomes hyper-focused on the perceived threat. But here's where it gets really interesting. When you're left on red, you can't fight the threat, and you can't run from it either. The person who's ignoring you isn't physically present, so there's nothing concrete you can do to resolve the situation. This leaves your brain in a state of chronic activation, constantly preparing for action, but having no outlet for that energy. This is why being left on red can feel so mentally and physically exhausting. Your body is essentially running on high alert, pumping out stress chemicals and keeping your nervous system activated, but you have no way to discharge that energy through action. It's like revving a car engine while keeping it in park. All that energy has nowhere to go, and eventually it starts to wear down the system. Let's talk about what's happening in your brain on a chemical level. When you send a message and anticipate a response, your brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. This is the same chemical that's released when you eat something delicious, win a game, or experience any other form of gratification. But dopamine isn't just released when you actually receive the reward, it's also released in anticipation of the reward. This is why waiting for a text back can actually feel exciting at first. Your brain is essentially betting that something good is about to happen, and it's giving you a little hit of dopamine to keep you motivated and engaged. However, when the expected reward doesn't come, something called a prediction error occurs. Your brain was expecting dopamine, but instead it gets nothing. This creates a kind of neurological disappointment that can feel surprisingly intense. It's not just that you didn't get what you wanted, it's that your brain was chemically prepared for something good to happen, and that preparation was essentially wasted. This prediction error doesn't just make you feel bad in the moment, it actually changes how your brain responds to similar situations in the future. If you've been left on red multiple times, your brain starts to expect rejection rather than connection. This can create a negative cycle where you become increasingly anxious about texting and increasingly sensitive to signs of social rejection. Now, let's dive deeper into the psychological mechanisms at play. One of the most significant factors in how your brain responds to being left on read is something called intermittent reinforcement. This is a principle from behavioral psychology that explains why some behaviors become so powerfully addictive. When you sometimes get responses to your texts and sometimes don't, your brain treats texting like a slot machine. Just like a gambler never knows when the next pull of the lever will result in a jackpot, you never know when your next text will get a response. This unpredictability makes the behavior incredibly compelling and hard to stop. Think about it. If someone never responded to your texts, you'd probably stop texting them pretty quickly. If someone always responded immediately, you'd feel secure, but probably wouldn't experience the same intense emotional highs and lows. But when responses are unpredictable, sometimes quick, sometimes delayed, sometimes never coming at all, your brain becomes obsessed with figuring out the pattern and trying to predict when the next reward will come. This is why being left on read by someone who usually responds can feel so particularly devastating. Your brain has been trained to expect a response based on past experience, and when that expectation is violated, the prediction error is even more intense. Another crucial factor is what psychologists call the need for cognitive closure. Humans have a fundamental need to understand and make sense of their experiences. We don't like uncertainty, ambiguity, or unfinished business. When someone leaves you on red, you're left in a state of cognitive limbo. You don't know why they didn't respond, what they're thinking, or what's going to happen next. This uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for your brain. In response, you might find yourself creating stories to fill in the gaps. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they didn't see the message. Maybe they're playing hard to get. Maybe they're not interested anymore. Maybe you said something wrong. Your brain cycles through these possibilities obsessively, trying to find an explanation that makes sense and resolves the uncertainty. But here's the problem. Without actual information from the other person, all of these stories are just speculation. And because humans have a tendency toward negative thinking, especially when we're already feeling vulnerable or anxious, we often assume the worst. This is called catastrophic thinking, and it can turn a simple delayed response into evidence that we're fundamentally unlovable or that the relationship is doomed. The psychological term for this is rumination, and it's one of the most damaging aspects of being left on read. Rumination is when you get stuck in repetitive negative thought patterns about a situation. Instead of processing the experience and moving on, you keep going over it again and again, analyzing every detail and usually making yourself feel worse in the process. Research has shown that rumination is strongly linked to depression and anxiety. When you ruminate about being left on read, you're not just dealing with the original disappointment of not getting a response. You're also dealing with the secondary emotional damage caused by your own repetitive negative thinking. But the psychological impact goes even deeper than rumination. Being left on read can trigger what psychologists call rejection sensitivity. This is a tendency to anxiously expect, readily perceive, and intensely react to rejection. If you're already prone to rejection sensitivity, being left on read can feel like confirmation of your worst fears about yourself and your relationships. For people with rejection sensitivity, a delayed or missing text response isn't just disappointing, it's evidence that they're not worthy of love or attention. This can create a vicious cycle where the fear of rejection leads to behaviors that actually increase the likelihood of rejection, such as sending multiple follow-up texts, appearing desperate or needy, or withdrawing from relationships altogether. Let's talk about the role of attachment styles in how you respond to being left on read. Attachment theory, developed by psychologist John Bowlby, suggests that our early relationships with caregivers shape how we approach relationships throughout our lives. There are 4 main attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. If you have a secure attachment style, you generally feel comfortable with intimacy and independence. When someone leaves you on read, you might feel disappointed, but you're likely to give them the benefit of the doubt and not take it too personally. You might think something like, "They're probably busy, I'll hear from them later." But if you have an anxious attachment style, being left on read can feel like a catastrophe. People with anxious attachment tend to crave closeness, but worry constantly about being abandoned or rejected. A delayed text response can trigger intense anxiety and a flood of negative thoughts about the relationship. You might find yourself checking your phone obsessively, sending follow-up messages, or assuming the worst about why they haven't responded. Those with an avoidant attachment style might have a different but equally problematic response. Instead of becoming anxious, they might use being left on read as evidence that relationships aren't worth the effort. They might tell themselves they don't care about the response anyway, even while secretly feeling hurt or rejected. The disorganized attachment style, which often results from inconsistent or traumatic early relationships, can lead to unpredictable responses to being left on read. Someone with this attachment style might alternate between intense anxiety and emotional withdrawal, never quite knowing how to interpret or respond to social situations. Understanding your attachment style can help you recognize why being left on read affects you the way it does and develop healthier coping strategies. But regardless of your attachment style, the experience of being ignored activates some very primitive parts of your brain that are designed to keep you connected to your social group. One of the most fascinating aspects of the brain's response to being left on read is how it mirrors the response to physical pain. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman and his colleagues have conducted groundbreaking research showing that social rejection activates the same brain regions that respond to physical injury. When you're left on read, areas like the anterior cingulate cortex and the right ventral prefrontal cortex light up on brain scans. These are the same regions that become active when you stub your toe or burn your hand. This isn't just a metaphor. Social pain and physical pain share real neurological pathways. This explains why we use the same language to describe both types of pain. We talk about feeling hurt by rejection, having a broken heart, or feeling like someone's words stab like a knife. These aren't just poetic expressions. They reflect the genuine overlap between social and physical pain in your brain. Interestingly, this overlap might have evolved because social connection was so crucial for human survival. Physical pain motivates us to take care of our bodies and avoid dangerous situations. Similarly, social pain motivates us to maintain relationships and avoid behaviors that might lead to rejection or isolation. But in the modern world of digital communication, this ancient system can work against us. Your brain can't tell the difference between being ignored by your tribe around a campfire and being left on read in a text message. Both situations activate the same pain pathways, even though one is truly threatening and the other is just annoying. Research has also shown that the pain of social rejection can be reduced by the same things that reduce physical pain. Studies have found that taking over-the-counter pain relievers like acetaminophen can actually reduce the emotional impact of social rejection. This doesn't mean you should start popping pain pills every time someone doesn't text you back, but it does demonstrate just how real and physiological the pain of being left on read truly is. Now let's explore how the specific features of digital communication make being left on read particularly challenging for your brain. Traditional face-to-face communication provides constant feedback. You can see facial expressions, hear tone of voice, and observe body language. Even if someone doesn't respond verbally, you have plenty of information to help you understand their reaction and emotional state. Text messaging strips away all of these contextual clues. You're left with nothing but words on a screen, and often not even that when someone doesn't respond at all. This lack of information forces your brain to fill in the gaps, and as we discussed earlier, it usually doesn't fill them in with positive assumptions. The read receipt feature makes this even more complicated. In the old days, if someone didn't call you back, you could assume they never got your message or were simply too busy to respond. But when you can see that your message was read, you know for certain that the person saw it and chose not to respond. This removes the comfortable ambiguity that might have protected your feelings in the past. The immediacy of text messaging also creates unrealistic expectations for response times. Unlike letters or even emails, text messages feel urgent and immediate. When someone doesn't respond within a few hours, it can feel like they're actively ignoring you, even though they might just be busy or dealing with other priorities. Social media adds another layer of complexity to this issue. When someone leaves you on read, but you can see them liking posts on Instagram or updating their Facebook status, it sends a clear message that they had time to be on their phone, but chose not to respond to you. This can feel like a deliberate slight rather than an oversight. The asynchronous nature of digital communication also means that conversations can stretch out over days or weeks with long gaps between responses. This creates multiple opportunities to be left on read and multiple opportunities for your brain to interpret silence as rejection. Let's talk about the addictive aspects of digital communication and how they relate to being left on read. Your smartphone is essentially a pocket-sized dopamine delivery device. Every notification, every message, every like or comment triggers a small release of dopamine in your brain. Tech companies have deliberately designed their products to be addictive, using principles from behavioral psychology to keep you checking your phone as often as possible. The variable ratio reinforcement schedule we talked about earlier, sometimes getting responses and sometimes not, is one of the most powerful tools in their arsenal. When you send a text and wait for a response, you're essentially playing a game where the rules are unclear and the rewards are unpredictable. This uncertainty keeps you coming back to check your phone again and again, hoping that this time you'll get the dopamine hit of a positive response. Being left on read disrupts this cycle in a particularly frustrating way. You've been conditioned to expect some kind of response, even if it's delayed. When no response comes at all, you're left in a state of anticipation that never resolves. It's like playing a slot machine that takes your money but never tells you whether you won or lost. This can create what psychologists call a dopamine crash. After the initial excitement of sending a message and the anticipation of a response, your dopamine levels drop below baseline when no response comes. This crash can leave you feeling worse than you did before you sent the message at all. The addictive nature of digital communication also means that being left on read can trigger withdrawal-like symptoms. You might find yourself checking your phone obsessively, feeling restless and unable to concentrate on other activities, or experiencing physical symptoms like increased heart rate or sweating. Now let's examine the social and cultural factors that influence how we interpret being left on read. Different generations, cultures, and social groups have different norms around digital communication, and these norms significantly impact how being left on read feels and what it means. For younger generations who grew up with smartphones, immediate responses to text messages are often expected. Being left on read might feel like a serious social violation, equivalent to ignoring someone who's speaking to you in person. For older generations who remember when communication was slower and less immediate, being left on read might feel less significant. Cultural factors also play a role. In cultures that prioritize direct communication, being left on read might be seen as rude or inconsiderate. In cultures that value indirect communication, people might be more comfortable with ambiguous responses or non-responses, seeing them as a polite way to avoid conflict or uncomfortable conversations. Your social group's norms around texting also influence your expectations. If you're part of a friend group where everyone responds to messages immediately, being left on read by someone in that group might feel more significant than if you're in a group where delayed responses are common. The context of your relationship with the person also matters enormously. Being left on read by a close friend or romantic partner feels very different from being left on read by an acquaintance or colleague. The closer the relationship, the more your brain interprets silence as meaningful and potentially threatening. Gender norms can also influence how being left on read is interpreted. Research suggests that women are often socialized to be more responsive in relationships and may feel more anxiety when they don't receive responses. Men, on the other hand, might be more likely to interpret being left on read as a challenge or a game, though this varies greatly among individuals. The timing of when you're left on read also affects its psychological impact. Being ignored during a conflict or after sharing something vulnerable feels much more significant than being left on read during casual conversation. Your brain is constantly evaluating the context to determine how much threat the silence represents. Let's delve into the concept of digital body language and how it affects our interpretation of being left on read. Just as we read physical body language in face-to-face interactions, we've developed ways to interpret digital signals in online communication. Response time has become a form of digital body language. A quick response can signal interest, attention, and priority. A delayed response might suggest busyness, lack of interest, or even passive aggression. No response at all can feel like a statement in itself, even when it might just be an oversight. The length and tone of messages also contribute to digital body language. If someone usually sends long, thoughtful messages but suddenly starts responding with short, curt replies, your brain might interpret this as a sign of decreased interest or emotional distance. Read receipts, typing indicators, and online status indicators have created new layers of digital body language that didn't exist in previous forms of communication. When you can see that someone read your message 2 hours ago and has been active on social media since then, their lack of response carries different weight than it would have in the pre-smartphone era. The problem with digital body language is that it's incredibly easy to misinterpret. Unlike physical body language, which evolved over millions of years and carries relatively consistent meanings across cultures, digital body language is new, culturally variable, and often ambiguous. Someone might leave you on red because they're busy, because they forgot to respond, because they don't know what to say, because they're dealing with personal issues, because they're trying to craft the perfect response, or for dozens of other reasons that have nothing to do with their feelings about you. But your brain, trained to look for social threats, often jumps to the most negative possible interpretation. This misinterpretation of digital body language can create problems in relationships that wouldn't exist in face-to-face communication. A delayed text response can spark arguments, create insecurity, and damage trust in ways that simply wouldn't happen if the same conversation took place in person. Let's explore the psychological concept of attribution theory and how it applies to being left on red. Attribution theory explains how people determine the causes of behavior, both their own behavior and the behavior of others. When someone leaves you on red, you have to make an attribution about why they didn't respond. Psychologists distinguish between internal attributions and external attributions. Internal attributions assume the behavior is due to something about the person's character, personality, or feelings. External attributions assume the behavior is due to situational factors outside the person's control. If you make an internal attribution when someone leaves you on red, you might think things like, "They don't care about me," "They're rude," or "They're not interested in our relationship." These attributions feel personal and threatening, and they're likely to trigger strong emotional responses. If you make an external attribution, you might think, "They must be busy," "They probably didn't see the message," or "Something important came up." These attributions are less personal and less threatening to your sense of self and your relationship. Research shows that we have a tendency to make internal attributions for other people's negative behaviors and external attributions for our own negative behaviors. This is called the fundamental attribution error, and it can make being left on red feel much worse than it needs to. When you don't respond to someone's message, you know all the situational factors that led to that behavior. Maybe you were in a meeting, maybe you were driving, maybe you saw the message at a bad time and forgot to respond later. But when someone doesn't respond to your message, you don't have access to those situational factors, so you're more likely to assume it's something personal. The fundamental attribution error can create a vicious cycle in relationships. When your partner leaves you on red, you assume it's because they don't care about you. When you leave them on read, you know it's because you were busy. This asymmetry in attribution can lead to resentment and conflict that's based more on misunderstanding than on actual relationship problems. Now, let's discuss the role of self-esteem in how you respond to being left on read. Your baseline level of self-esteem significantly influences how you interpret and react to social ambiguity. If you have high self-esteem, you're more likely to give people the benefit of the doubt when they don't respond to your messages. You might assume they're busy or dealing with other priorities, and you're less likely to take their silence personally. You have a stable sense of your own worth that doesn't depend heavily on constant validation from others. If you have low self-esteem, being left on read can feel like confirmation of your worst fears about yourself. You might interpret silence as evidence that you're not important, not interesting, or not worthy of a response. This can trigger a spiral of negative self-talk that makes the original disappointment much worse. Low self-esteem can also lead to behaviors that actually increase the likelihood of being left on red or responded to negatively. You might send multiple follow-up messages, appear needy or desperate, or become accusatory about the lack of response. These behaviors can push people away and create the very rejection you were afraid of in the first place. Self-esteem also affects how you regulate your emotions when you're left on red. People with higher self-esteem tend to have better emotional regulation skills and can bounce back more quickly from social disappointments. People with lower self-esteem might get stuck in rumination and negative thinking patterns that prolong and intensify their emotional distress. The relationship between self-esteem and social rejection is complex and bidirectional. Low self-esteem makes you more sensitive to rejection, but experiencing repeated rejection can also lower your self-esteem over time. This can create a negative cycle that's difficult to break without conscious effort and sometimes professional help. Let's examine the role of perfectionism in making being left on read more difficult to handle. Perfectionism isn't just about wanting things to be perfect. It's a complex psychological pattern that affects how you think about yourself, your relationships, and your performance in various areas of life. If you're a perfectionist, you might have unrealistic expectations about how communication should work. You might expect every conversation to flow smoothly, every message to receive a thoughtful response, and every interaction to go according to plan. When someone leaves you on red, it violates these expectations and can trigger intense frustration and self-criticism. Perfectionists also tend to engage in all-or-nothing thinking. If someone doesn't respond to a message, a perfectionist might jump to the conclusion that the entire relationship is ruined or that they're a complete failure at communication. This black-and-white thinking makes it difficult to see nuance or consider alternative explanations for the lack of response. The perfectionist tendency towards self-criticism can turn being left on read into an opportunity for harsh self-judgment. Instead of recognizing that not getting a response is a normal part of human communication, perfectionists might berate themselves for sending the wrong message or not being interesting enough to warrant a response. Perfectionism can also lead to excessive editing and re-editing of messages before sending them, followed by intense anxiety about whether the message was perfect enough to deserve a response. This creates additional pressure around communication that makes being left on read feel even more significant and personal. Now let's explore the neuroscience of uncertainty and why not knowing why someone didn't respond can feel so uncomfortable. The human brain is essentially a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to anticipate what's going to happen next based on past experience and current information. Uncertainty interferes with this prediction process and triggers what neuroscientists call prediction error. When you can't predict what's going to happen, your brain interprets this as a potential threat and activates stress response systems to help you deal with the unknown danger. Being left on read creates a particularly challenging type of uncertainty because it's open-ended. If someone said they would call you at 3 p.m. and didn't call, you'd know by 3:30 that something was wrong. But when someone doesn't respond to a text, there's no clear deadline for when you should start worrying or give up hope for a response. This open-ended uncertainty can keep your brain in a state of chronic activation, constantly scanning for resolution that may never come. The anterior cingulate cortex, which helps monitor conflicts and inconsistencies, becomes hyperactive when you're dealing with unresolved social situations. Research has shown that uncertainty is often more stressful than knowing something bad is going to happen. If someone told you directly that they weren't interested in continuing a conversation, it would probably hurt, but at least you'd have clarity. The ambiguity of being left on red can actually be more distressing than explicit rejection. Your brain's discomfort with uncertainty explains why you might find yourself creating elaborate stories to explain why someone didn't respond. Even a negative explanation can feel better than no explanation at all, because it provides the sense of closure and understanding that your brain craves. Let's discuss the impact of being left on read on your sleep and physical health. The stress and anxiety triggered by social rejection can have wide-ranging effects on your body that extend far beyond your emotional state. When you're left on read, especially by someone important to you, your body's stress response system activates. Cortisol levels rise, your heart rate increases, and your nervous system shifts into a state of heightened alertness. If this activation is brief, it's not particularly harmful. But when you ruminate about being ignored for hours or days, this stress response can become chronic. Chronic stress has been linked to a wide range of health problems, including compromised immune function, digestive issues, cardiovascular problems, and sleep disturbances. The stress of social rejection can be particularly harmful because it often involves rumination, which keeps your stress response system activated long after the initial trigger. Sleep is often one of the first things affected when you're dealing with social stress. You might find yourself lying awake at night thinking about why someone didn't respond, analyzing the conversation over and over, or worrying about what their silence means for your relationship. The blue light from checking your phone repeatedly can also disrupt your sleep patterns. When you're anxiously waiting for a response, you might find yourself checking your phone late into the night, which interferes with your body's natural sleep-wake cycle. Poor sleep then creates a vicious cycle because sleep deprivation makes you more emotionally reactive and less able to cope with stress. When you're tired, being left on read is likely to feel even more devastating than it would if you were well rested. The physical symptoms of social rejection can also include headaches, muscle tension, changes in appetite, and digestive problems. Some people report feeling physically sick when they're dealing with interpersonal stress, and this isn't just psychological. The mind-body connection means that emotional distress can manifest in very real physical symptoms. Now let's examine how being left on read affects your ability to concentrate and be productive. The uncertainty and stress associated with waiting for a response can significantly impact your cognitive performance. When part of your mental energy is devoted to worrying about why someone didn't text you back, you have less cognitive resources available for other tasks. This is called cognitive load, and it can affect everything from your ability to focus at work, to your performance in school, to your capacity for creative thinking. The frequent phone checking that often accompanies being left on read can also fragment your attention and make it difficult to engage in deep, focused work. Every time you interrupt a task to check your phone, it takes time and mental energy to refocus on what you were doing. Research has shown that even having your phone visible on your desk can reduce cognitive performance because part of your brain is always monitoring for notifications. When you're anxiously waiting for a specific response, this effect is magnified. The emotional energy required to manage your feelings about being left on read can also be exhausting. Emotional regulation requires mental resources, and when you're constantly trying to talk yourself out of feeling hurt or rejected, you have less energy available for other cognitive tasks. This can create problems in multiple areas of your life. Your work performance might suffer, your relationships with other people might be affected by your distraction and preoccupation, and your ability to enjoy activities and experiences might be diminished. Let's explore the social comparison aspect of being left on read in the age of social media. When someone doesn't respond to your message but you can see them being active on social platforms, it can trigger intense feelings of social comparison and rejection. Social media provides unprecedented visibility into other people's lives and activities. When you can see that someone has been posting photos, liking posts, or updating their status, their failure to respond to your message feels like a deliberate choice rather than an oversight. This visibility can turn neutral situations into painful ones. In the past, if someone didn't return your phone call, you had no way of knowing what they were doing instead. Now, you might see them posting about their dinner, their workout, or their night out with friends, all while your message sits unanswered. Social comparison theory suggests that we evaluate ourselves relative to others, and social media provides constant opportunities for these comparisons. When someone responds to other people's comments but not to your private message, or when they're clearly active online but not responding to you, it can feel like public evidence that you're less important or interesting than others. The curated nature of social media also creates unrealistic standards for communication and relationships. People typically share the highlights of their lives and relationships online, which can make your own experiences feel inadequate by comparison. When you're struggling with being left on red, seeing other people's seemingly perfect interactions can make you feel even worse about your situation. The fear of missing out, or FOMO, can also intensify the pain of being left on read. When you see other people having fun or engaging in activities without you, and the person who's ignoring you is clearly active and available, it can trigger feelings of exclusion and social rejection. Now let's discuss the generational differences in how being left on red is perceived and experienced. Different age groups have very different relationships with technology and communication, which significantly affects how they interpret digital silence. For Generation Z and younger millennials who grew up with smartphones, immediate communication is often the norm. These generations expect quick responses to text messages and may interpret delays as meaningful. Being left on red can feel like a serious social slight, equivalent to being ignored in face-to-face conversation. Older millennials and Generation X remember a time when communication was slower and less immediate. They may be more comfortable with delayed responses and less likely to interpret being left on read as a personal rejection. However, they may also struggle with the ambiguity of digital communication after growing up with more direct forms of interaction. Baby boomers and older generations often have the most relaxed attitude toward digital communication delays. Having lived most of their lives without instant communication, they may not feel the same urgency around text responses and may be less likely to check their phones constantly. These generational differences can create misunderstandings in relationships and friendships that cross age groups. A younger person might feel hurt and rejected when an older person doesn't respond immediately to a text, while the older person might not realize that their delayed response was interpreted as meaningful. The workplace can be particularly challenging when it comes to generational differences in communication expectations. Younger employees might expect immediate responses to messages and feel anxious or frustrated when older colleagues or supervisors don't respond quickly. Older employees might feel overwhelmed by the expectation of constant availability and immediate responses. Understanding these generational differences can help reduce some of the anxiety and misinterpretation around being left on read. What feels like rejection to one generation might be completely normal behavior to another. Let's examine the role of personality traits in how you respond to being left on read. Your individual personality characteristics significantly influence how you interpret and react to social situations, including digital communication. If you're high in neuroticism, one of the big 5 personality traits, you're likely to experience more intense emotional reactions to being left on read. Neurotic individuals tend to be more sensitive to stress and more prone to anxiety and negative emotions. A delayed or missing text response might trigger intense worry, catastrophic thinking, and emotional distress. People high in extroversion might also struggle with being left on read, but for different reasons. Extroverts gain energy from social interaction and may feel particularly frustrated when communication is cut off or delayed. They might be more likely to send follow-up messages or try to re-establish contact through other channels. Those high in openness to experience might be more likely to consider alternative explanations for why someone didn't respond and might be more tolerant of ambiguous social situations. They may be better at managing the uncertainty that comes with being left on read. Individuals high in agreeableness might blame themselves when someone doesn't respond, assuming they must have said something wrong or offensive. They may be more likely to apologize or try to smooth over perceived conflicts that may not actually exist. People high in conscientiousness might have strong expectations about communication etiquette and may feel particularly frustrated when others don't follow what they perceive as basic social rules, like responding to messages in a timely manner. Your level of social anxiety also plays a significant role in how you experience being left on read. If you already struggle with social anxiety, digital communication can feel particularly fraught because it removes many of the social cues you might rely on to gauge other people's reactions and intentions. Anxious attachment, which we discussed earlier, often goes hand in hand with social anxiety and can make being left on read feel like confirmation of your worst fears about relationships and social acceptance. Now let's explore some of the positive coping strategies you can use when someone leaves you on read. While the psychological and physiological responses we've discussed are largely automatic, you do have some control over how you manage and respond to these reactions. The first and most important strategy is developing awareness of what's happening in your brain and body when you're left on read. Understanding that your intense reaction is partly due to evolutionary programming can help you take it less personally and respond more rationally. Practicing mindfulness can be incredibly helpful for managing the anxiety and rumination that often accompany being left on read. Mindfulness involves observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment and without getting caught up in them. When you notice yourself starting to spiral into negative thinking about why someone didn't respond, you can acknowledge those thoughts without believing them or acting on them impulsively. Cognitive reframing is another powerful tool. This involves consciously challenging your negative assumptions and considering alternative explanations for someone's lack of response. Instead of assuming they're ignoring you because they don't care, you can remind yourself of all the innocent reasons why someone might not respond immediately. Maybe they're in a meeting, dealing with a family situation, having phone problems, or simply forgot to respond after reading your message. Setting boundaries around phone checking can also help manage the anxiety of waiting for responses. Instead of checking your phone every few minutes, try designating specific times to check messages and then putting your phone away. This prevents the constant cycle of hope and disappointment that comes with frequent checking. Engaging in activities that require your full attention can help break the cycle of rumination. Exercise, creative projects, spending time with friends, or immersing yourself in work can redirect your mental energy away from worrying about unanswered messages. It's also helpful to diversify your social connections so that your emotional well-being doesn't depend too heavily on responses from any one person. When you have multiple sources of social connection and validation, being left on read by one person feels less catastrophic. Developing a personal policy about follow-up messages can reduce anxiety and prevent you from acting impulsively when someone doesn't respond. You might decide that you'll wait 24 hours before sending a follow-up, or that you'll only send one follow-up message maximum. Having a clear policy helps you feel more in control of the situation. Communication is key in close relationships. If being left on read is causing ongoing problems with a romantic partner, family member, or close friend, it's worth having a conversation about communication preferences and expectations. You might discover that they have a different relationship with texting than you do, or that there are simple changes that could reduce misunderstandings. Self-compassion is crucial when dealing with the pain of social rejection. Instead of criticizing yourself for caring so much about a text response, try to treat yourself with the same kindness you'd show a good friend in the same situation. Remember that caring about your relationships and wanting connection is fundamentally human and healthy. Let's discuss the importance of developing emotional regulation skills specifically for digital communication. The immediacy and ambiguity of text messaging can trigger intense emotions very quickly, and learning to manage these responses is essential for maintaining healthy relationships and mental well-being. One effective technique is the pause and breathe approach. When you notice yourself becoming anxious or upset about being left on red, take a moment to pause whatever you're doing and take several deep, slow breaths. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system and helps counteract the fight-or-flight response that social rejection triggers. The 24-hour rule can be particularly helpful for managing impulsive responses to being left on read. This rule suggests waiting 24 hours before sending any follow-up messages or making assumptions about why someone didn't respond. Often, situations that feel urgent and catastrophic in the moment feel much more manageable after some time has passed. Grounding techniques can help when you're feeling overwhelmed by anxiety about an unanswered message. The 5-4-3-2-1 technique involves identifying 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This brings your attention back to the present moment and helps interrupt anxious rumination. Journaling can be an effective way to process your feelings about being left on red without impulsively expressing them to the person who didn't respond. Writing down your thoughts and emotions can help you identify patterns in your thinking and develop more balanced perspectives on social situations. Regular exercise is one of the most effective ways to manage the stress and anxiety that can accompany social rejection. Physical activity helps metabolize stress hormones, releases endorphins that improve mood, and provides a healthy outlet for the nervous energy that builds up when you're waiting for responses. Now let's explore the concept of digital wellness and how cultivating a healthier relationship with technology can reduce the impact of being left on red. Digital wellness involves being intentional about how you use technology and creating boundaries that protect your mental health and relationships. One aspect of digital wellness is managing your notification settings. Constant notifications can keep you in a state of hypervigilance, always waiting for the next message or update. Consider turning off read receipts, disabling notifications for non-essential apps, or setting specific times when you're available for digital communication. Creating phone-free zones or times can help reduce your overall anxiety about digital communication. This might mean keeping your phone out of the bedroom, having phone-free meals, or designating certain hours of the day as technology-free time. These boundaries help you develop a healthier relationship with your devices and reduce the constant pressure to be available and responsive. Regular digital detoxes, even short ones, can help reset your relationship with technology and reduce your sensitivity to things like being left on red. This might involve taking a few hours a day or even a weekend break from social media and messaging apps. Curating your digital environment is also important for digital wellness. This means being selective about which apps you use, which notifications you allow, and how you structure your digital interactions. If certain apps or features consistently make you feel anxious or inadequate, consider whether they're adding enough value to your life to justify their negative impact. Practicing intentional communication can improve your digital relationships and reduce misunderstandings. This means being clear about your expectations, expressing yourself thoughtfully rather than impulsively, and being willing to have important conversations through more direct channels when text messaging isn't sufficient. Let's examine the role of self-awareness in managing your response to being left on read. The more you understand your own patterns, triggers, and tendencies, the better equipped you'll be to respond in healthy ways when social situations don't go as expected. Start by paying attention to which situations make being left on read feel more or less significant. You might notice that you're more sensitive when you're already feeling stressed, lonely, or insecure. Or you might find that being left on read by certain people affects you more than others, depending on the nature of your relationship and your feelings about them. Notice your physical responses to being left on read. Do you feel tension in your shoulders? Does your heart rate increase? Do you get a knot in your stomach? Becoming aware of these physical signals can help you recognize when you're starting to get worked up and take steps to manage your response before it escalates. Pay attention to your thought patterns when someone doesn't respond to your messages. Do you immediately assume the worst? Do you start creating elaborate stories about what their silence means? Do you begin criticizing yourself or the message you sent? Identifying these patterns is the first step in changing them. Consider keeping a communication journal where you track your digital interactions and your emotional responses to them. Over time, you might notice patterns that can help you understand your triggers and develop more effective coping strategies. Self-awareness also involves understanding your own communication style and preferences. Some people prefer immediate responses and constant contact, while others are more comfortable with sporadic communication and longer response times. Neither style is right or wrong, but understanding your preferences can help you communicate them to others and manage your expectations more effectively. Now let's discuss the importance of building resilience to social rejection more broadly. While being left on read might seem like a minor issue, developing skills to handle this type of social ambiguity can improve your overall emotional resilience and relationship satisfaction. Resilience involves the ability to bounce back from disappointments and setbacks without being overwhelmed by them. People who are resilient don't necessarily experience less stress or disappointment, but they recover more quickly and don't let negative experiences define their self-worth or worldview. One key component of resilience is developing a stable sense of self-worth that doesn't depend entirely on external validation. When your self-esteem is primarily based on how others respond to you, every social interaction becomes a potential threat to your emotional well-being. Building internal sources of self-worth makes you less vulnerable to the ups and downs of social relationships. Cultivating a growth mindset can also increase your resilience to social rejection. Instead of viewing being left on read as evidence that you're fundamentally flawed or unlikable, try to see it as information about the other person's current situation or communication style. A growth mindset helps you learn from social experiences without taking them too personally. Building a diverse support network is crucial for resilience. When you have multiple sources of social connection and emotional support, being ignored or rejected by one person doesn't feel as catastrophic. Invest time and energy in developing and maintaining relationships with family, friends, colleagues, and community members. Developing your own interests and sources of fulfillment outside of your relationships makes you less dependent on others for your happiness and sense of purpose. When you have meaningful work, hobbies, creative pursuits, or causes you care about, your emotional well-being isn't entirely dependent on your social interactions. Learning to tolerate uncertainty is another important aspect of resilience. Life is inherently uncertain, and relationships involve constant ambiguity and unknowns. The more comfortable you can become with not knowing exactly where you stand with someone or what they're thinking, the less distressing experiences, like being left on read, will become. Let's explore the connection between being left on read and broader issues of control and agency. One reason being left on read can feel so frustrating is that it puts you in a position where you have no control over the outcome. You've sent your message, and now you're completely dependent on someone else's actions to resolve the situation. This loss of control can be particularly difficult for people who generally like to feel in charge of their circumstances. When you can't do anything to make someone respond to your message, it can trigger feelings of helplessness and frustration that go beyond the specific situation. Recognizing what you can and cannot control in communication situations can help reduce this anxiety. You can control what you say, how you say it, and when you send messages. You cannot control how quickly someone responds, whether they respond at all, or how they interpret your communications. Focusing your energy on the aspects of communication that you can control, rather than worrying about the aspects you can't control, can help you feel more empowered and less anxious about digital interactions. This principle extends beyond text messaging to relationships and life in general. The more you can accept that other people's actions are outside your control, the less personally you'll take their behavior, and the more energy you'll have for focusing on your own choices and responses. Now let's discuss the role of empathy in managing your response to being left on read. While it's natural to focus on your own feelings when someone doesn't respond to your message, trying to understand their perspective can help reduce your emotional reaction and improve your relationships. Consider all the innocent reasons why someone might not respond immediately. They might be dealing with work stress, family problems, health issues, or personal challenges that you're not aware of. They might be the type of person who prefers to respond thoughtfully rather than quickly, or they might have simply forgotten to respond after reading your message. Some people have different relationships with their phones and digital communication than you do. They might not check their messages frequently, might not prioritize immediate responses, or might prefer face-to-face or phone communication over texting. Technical issues can also interfere with communication. Messages sometimes don't deliver properly, phones run out of battery, or people might accidentally mark messages as read without actually reading them thoroughly. Remember that everyone has different communication styles and preferences. Some people are naturally more responsive and communicative, while others are more reserved or sporadic in their communication. Neither style is inherently better or worse, but understanding these differences can help you interpret others' behavior more accurately. Practicing empathy doesn't mean making excuses for people who consistently ignore you or treat you poorly, but it does mean giving people the benefit of the doubt in ambiguous situations and not immediately assuming the worst about their intentions. Let's examine the importance of setting realistic expectations for digital communication. Many of the negative feelings associated with being left on read stem from unrealistic expectations about how communication should work in the digital age. The expectation of immediate responses is relatively new in human history. For most of human existence, communication was slow and delayed. Letters took days or weeks to arrive, and there was no expectation of immediate responses. Even phone calls required both parties to be available at the same time. Text messaging has created an illusion of immediacy that doesn't always match reality. Just because you can send a message instantly doesn't mean the recipient is available to respond instantly. They might be working, sleeping, driving, in a meeting, or dealing with other priorities. Setting realistic expectations means accepting that response times will vary depending on the person, the situation, and the content of your message. Casual messages might get quick responses, while more serious or complex topics might require more time for the person to formulate a thoughtful reply. It's also important to recognize that not every message requires a response. Sometimes people read messages and don't respond because they don't feel a response is necessary or because they don't know what to say. This doesn't necessarily mean they're ignoring you or don't care about you. Consider establishing communication agreements with important people in your life. This might involve discussing response time expectations, preferred communication channels for different types of conversations, or how to handle situations when immediate responses aren't possible. Remember that everyone has different communication styles, schedules, and priorities. What feels like an appropriate response time to you might feel rushed to someone else, or what feels like a long delay to you might feel normal to them. Now let's discuss the broader implications of digital communication for human relationships and social connection. The way we communicate through technology is changing fundamental aspects of how we relate to each other, and understanding these changes can help us navigate them more successfully. Digital communication lacks many of the nonverbal cues that we rely on in face-to-face interaction. Tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, and other subtle signals help us understand not just what someone is saying, but how they feel about what they're saying and how they feel about us. Without these cues, we're left to interpret meaning from words alone, which can lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations. This is why emoji, GIFs, and other visual elements have become so popular. They're attempts to restore some of the emotional context that's missing from text-based communication. The asynchronous nature of digital communication also changes the rhythm and flow of relationships. Instead of having conversations that unfold in real time, we often have interactions that stretch out over hours, days, or even weeks. This can create a different kind of intimacy and connection, but it can also create more opportunities for misunderstanding and anxiety. The permanence of digital communication is another factor that affects relationships. Unlike spoken conversations that exist only in memory, text messages create a permanent record that can be revisited, analyzed, and reinterpreted long after they were sent. Social media adds another layer of complexity by making many aspects of people's lives public that were previously private. This visibility can create new forms of social comparison, jealousy, and misunderstanding that didn't exist in pre-digital relationships. Despite these challenges, digital communication also offers unique benefits. It allows us to maintain relationships across distances, stay connected with larger networks of people, and communicate in ways that might feel safer or more comfortable for some individuals. The key is learning to use digital communication tools intentionally and skillfully rather than letting them use us. This means being aware of their limitations, setting appropriate boundaries, and supplementing digital communication with face-to-face interaction when possible. Let's explore some specific strategies for improving your digital communication skills and reducing the likelihood of misunderstandings that can lead to anxiety about being left on read. Be clear and specific in your messages. Ambiguous or vague messages are more likely to be misinterpreted or ignored. If you're asking a question, make it clear that you're looking for a response. If you're sharing information that doesn't require a response, you can say so explicitly. Consider the timing of your messages. Sending messages late at night, early in the morning, or during typical work hours might affect how quickly someone can respond. If you need a quick response, say so, but also be realistic about whether your time frame is reasonable. Use appropriate channels for different types of communication. Text messages might be fine for casual conversation or quick questions, but more serious or complex topics might be better handled through phone calls or face-to-face conversations. Pay attention to the length and tone of your messages. Very long messages might be overwhelming and harder to respond to, While very short messages might seem curt or dismissive, try to match the tone and length of the person you're communicating with. Don't assume that being left on read means something negative. There are many innocent explanations for delayed or missing responses, and jumping to negative conclusions often creates problems that don't actually exist. When in doubt, ask for clarification rather than making assumptions. If someone's communication seems off, or if you're unsure about their meaning, it's better to ask directly than to worry about it or make up stories about what they meant. Be forgiving of miscommunications and misunderstandings. Digital communication is inherently prone to these issues, and approaching them with patience and humor rather than defensiveness or anger will improve your relationships. Now let's discuss the importance of developing offline sources of connection and validation. While digital communication has become a major part of how we maintain relationships, it shouldn't be the only source of social connection in your life. Face-to-face interactions provide types of connection and validation that digital communication simply can't replicate. The immediate feedback, non-verbal communication, and shared physical presence of in-person interaction engage different parts of your brain and fulfill different social needs. Engaging in activities that don't involve digital communication can help reduce your overall anxiety about things like being left on read. When you have fulfilling offline experiences and relationships, your emotional well-being becomes less dependent on digital interactions. Consider joining clubs, taking classes, volunteering, or participating in community activities that align with your interests. These activities provide opportunities for social connection that don't involve the ambiguity and potential anxiety of digital communication. Spending time in nature, exercising, pursuing creative hobbies, or engaging in spiritual practices can also provide sources of fulfillment and self-worth that don't depend on other people's responses to your communications. Building a rich, varied life that includes both digital and offline elements makes you more resilient to the inevitable disappointments and uncertainties that come with any form of communication or relationship. Let's examine the role of professional help in dealing with severe anxiety or distress related to being left on read. While occasional anxiety about unanswered messages is normal, persistent, severe distress that interferes with your daily life or relationships might benefit from professional support. If you find yourself checking your phone compulsively, unable to concentrate on work or other activities because you're waiting for responses, or experiencing physical symptoms like panic attacks when someone doesn't respond to your messages, it might be time to consider talking to a therapist. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be particularly helpful for addressing the thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to anxiety about digital communication. A therapist can help you identify and challenge negative assumptions, develop more balanced thinking patterns, and learn concrete coping strategies. If you have underlying mental health conditions like anxiety disorders, depression, or attachment trauma, these issues might make you more sensitive to social rejection and more likely to struggle with things like being left on read. Addressing these underlying issues can significantly improve your overall quality of life and relationships. Group therapy or support groups can also be helpful for people who struggle with social anxiety or relationship issues. Hearing from others who have similar experiences can reduce feelings of isolation and provide practical strategies for managing difficult situations. In some cases, medication might be helpful for managing severe anxiety or depression that's interfering with your ability to function or maintain relationships. A psychiatrist or primary care physician can help determine whether medication might be beneficial for your situation. Remember that seeking professional help isn't a sign of weakness or failure. It's a proactive step toward improving your mental health and relationships. and many people find it incredibly helpful for developing better coping strategies and emotional regulation skills. As we near the end of our exploration, let's take a moment to reflect on the bigger picture of what being left on read represents in our modern world. This seemingly simple phenomenon actually reveals a great deal about human nature, technology's impact on relationships, and the challenges of maintaining connection in an increasingly digital world. The anxiety and distress that many people feel when left on read speaks to our fundamental need for social connection and validation. Despite all of our technological advances, we're still the same social creatures who evolved to depend on our tribe for survival. Our brains haven't caught up to the reality that digital silence doesn't actually threaten our survival. At the same time, being left on read highlights some of the limitations and challenges of digital communication. While technology has given us unprecedented ability to stay connected across distances and time zones, it has also created new forms of ambiguity and anxiety that our ancestors never had to deal with. The experience of being left on read also reveals how much our sense of self-worth and emotional well-being can become tied to external validation. When someone else's response or lack thereof can significantly impact our mood and self-perception, it suggests that we might benefit from developing stronger internal sources of validation and self-worth. But perhaps most importantly, understanding what happens in your brain when someone leaves you on read can help you respond more skillfully to these situations. When you realize that your intense reaction is partly due to evolutionary programming that's no longer relevant to your actual survival, you can take it less personally and respond more rationally. When you understand that the other person's lack of response probably has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own circumstances, preferences, and communication style, you can avoid taking their behavior as a reflection of your worth or the value of your relationship. When you recognize that the uncertainty and ambiguity of digital communication naturally trigger anxiety in most people, you can be more compassionate with yourself when you struggle with these feelings and more proactive about developing healthy coping strategies. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional reactions to being left on read. Caring about your relationships and wanting connection is fundamentally human and healthy. The goal is to respond to these situations in ways that serve your overall well-being and the health of your relationships. This might mean taking a few deep breaths before checking your phone for the 100th time. It might mean consciously choosing to assume the best about someone's intentions rather than the worst. It might mean redirecting your attention to other activities and relationships when you're waiting for a response. It might mean having direct conversations about communication preferences with the important people in your life. Most importantly, it means recognizing that being left on read is a normal part of digital communication that says more about the limitations of the medium than it does about you or your relationships. By understanding the psychology and neuroscience behind your reactions, you can develop more effective strategies for managing them and maintaining your emotional well-being in our increasingly connected world. As we wrap up this deep dive into the science of being left on read, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways that you can apply to your own life and relationships. First, remember that your intense emotional reaction to being left on read is normal and understandable. Your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do based on millions of years of evolution. Don't criticize yourself for caring about your relationships or wanting connection with others. Second, practice giving people the benefit of the doubt when they don't respond immediately to your messages. There are countless innocent explanations for delayed or missing responses, and assuming the worst usually creates more problems than it solves. Third, develop strategies for managing your anxiety and rumination when you're waiting for responses. Whether it's mindfulness, physical exercise, engaging in other activities, or setting boundaries around phone checking. Find what works for you and practice it consistently. Fourth, work on building a diverse network of relationships and sources of fulfillment so that your emotional well-being doesn't depend too heavily on any one person's responses or any one form of communication. Fifth, communicate directly with the important people in your life about communication preferences and expectations. Many misunderstandings can be avoided simply by having clear conversations about how you prefer to communicate and what different behaviors mean to each of you. Finally, remember that healthy relationships can survive and even thrive despite the occasional miscommunication or delayed response. The people who truly care about you will understand your communication style and work with you to maintain connection, even when digital communication doesn't go perfectly. Being left on red might always trigger some level of emotional response. That's just part of being human in the digital age. But by understanding what's happening in your brain and developing healthy coping strategies, you can prevent these situations from causing unnecessary suffering or damaging your relationships. The next time someone leaves you on red, take a moment to remember everything we've discussed today. Your reaction is normal, their behavior probably isn't personal, and this too shall pass. Focus on what you can control, practice self-compassion, and remember that your worth as a person isn't determined by how quickly someone responds to your text messages. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the fascinating world of your brain on digital rejection. If this video helped you understand your own reactions better or gave you some useful strategies for managing communication anxiety, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you found this content valuable, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology behind everyday experiences. Remember, understanding your brain is the first step toward mastering your responses and living a more intentional, fulfilling life. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others, and remember that behind every screen is a human being, just trying to navigate this complicated world of digital connection, just like you.